Hello, Patter readers. I am back with another video as promised to talk about Rafe Judkins' Q&A that he did on Twitter post the San Diego Comic-Con Wheel of Time drop, where it was announced that Wheel of Time was going to be renewed for season 3, and we got an awesome behind-the-scenes teaser for season 2. All of the questions for Rafe were supposed to be about season 2 of the Wheel of Time, so his answers will often contain hints and sometimes outright answers about what we will see in season 2. So if you don't want to know that, then this video is probably not for you. But I'm also going to be speculating as I read through these answers about what some of these things mean, and that is going to necessarily involve book spoilers. I will be limiting those spoilers to books 2 and 3 of the Wheel of Time because that's how far the plot is supposed to advance in season 2, according to Rafe. So if you need to avoid that, this is also something you might want to check out of. I am going to try to cover all of Rafe's answers, plus maybe some bonus content. If there are some answers that I don't cover, it's probably going to be because they were not so relevant to the Wheel of Time, but I am going to link for you a summary of all the Q&A that was done on WoTSeries.com. So you can also check that out if you want a succinct summary of all the questions and answers. Jared McNeil wants to know, can you tell us how much you will be expanding on the Forsaken in the season? Rafe says it's a big point of difference from the books in season 2. We will spend more time with any Forsaken who's in the show, more how the later books treat the Forsaken than necessarily books 2 or 3 did. So let's get into that a little bit. In books 2 and 3, it's pretty easy to say that the two most prominent Forsaken are Lanfear and Ishmael. We actually don't really know that it's Ishmael until the end of book 3. At least we've had some hints, but until Rand finally kills the person who's calling himself Baalzamon at the end of book 3, we're still a little bit unclear perhaps as to who that actually is. It's Ishmael. So these two characters are pretty prominent in those two books, but we don't really know who they are necessarily, especially in book 2, we have a lot of Lanfear when she is posing as someone else. So that could be interesting to see how they're going to potentially mask or unmask these characters in the show. I personally would be very happy to have a moment at some point in the season where it is revealed that a character or characters that we've been spending time with are actually Forsaken. I think that could be really fun, and it might be even fun if some of the disguises that the Forsaken are using are not the same ones they used in the book, so it might even be a little bit of a surprise to book readers. So I'd love to see that. And it'll also be interesting to see if there's more than the two Forsaken that we might expect. We also have had Ishmael set up as sort of the dark one in the show, which fits in with how he's portraying himself in the book. So again, how they're going to handle that, who is he really, will be interesting to see. By the way, Rafe did also answer a question about whether there would be more than one Forsaken. The person asked him to blink twice if there would be more than one Forsaken in the season, and he gave us these 2 eyes closed emojis. So I think that confirms it. Again, not surprising. We would expect there to be at least 2 anyway. Whether there's more than that is totally unknown. Rafe had a couple of questions and answers about how far into the books they're going to cover in season 2. So let's get into those. How far into the books will this season take us, knowing that the Emmonsfield 5 are much more split up than the Eye of the World? We are trying to get a fair amount of what's done in books 1 to 3, large parts still being held for later, by the end of season 2, so that season 3 can be a much closer adaptation of The Shadow Rising. Rodel Icharalda also asks which books make it into season 2, and Rafe answers pieces of 1, 2, and 3. So this makes sense with things I've said before, that season 2 would largely cover books 2 and 3. We know that most of book 1 has already been covered, but that there are some parts that haven't been. The obvious example being Elias. We know that he has been cast for season 2, whereas the character of Elias is in book 1 and not in books 2 and 3. So they've shifted that part. Books 2 and 3, there's lots of repetition between them in terms of the structure of the plots. And so I can really see them streamlining that, perhaps not including some elements at all. But as Rafe is saying here, some of those things might be saved until later. One thing I've been thinking about a lot, for example, is can the whole plot of Rand taking Kalendor that happens in book 3 actually happen later in the books? Because he takes it and then he leaves it there because he doesn't really need it right away. So it would be interesting to see if they save that for later, and that would not surprise me at all. The other important thing to note here is that Rafe is saying season 3, they want to be a much closer adaptation of book 4, The Shadow Rising. that should be music to a lot of fans' ears because The Shadow Rising is a favorite book. And he's saying a closer adaptation, which a lot of book fans are looking for. And I think because it's such a strong book in and of itself, that might be more doable than perhaps the first 3 books, which are strong books and absolutely crucial to the series, but have a little bit more of a traditional plot, a little bit more of similar plots among them. And so they have a vision perhaps of how they're going to do season 3 closer to book 4. And Sarah Nakamura repeated that same idea. So I think that's pretty clearly where they're headed. Jeremy Ness asks, what new character or actor are you most excited to introduce us to? Rafe says there are so many, Avienda, Elaine, and others that have been both announced but not announced, and of course, Bail Domon. So here we have an acknowledgement, of course, that the fans have perhaps sleuthed out quite a number of actors that are going to be in the show, or he's answered about certain characters who are going to be in the show, but we don't have all the details on yet. So he's not making any new announcements here. But I do like that he gave a little shout out to Bail Domon, who's a really fun little side character that a lot of fans appreciate in the books. And we did know that he was going to be in the cast, so I'm excited for that. One of my favorite questions here from Kraus9. They ask, will we see more than one of these cities in season 2? And they list Cairhien, Tyr, and Falme. And Rafe Judkins says yes. So I think we've already known that Falme was going to be in the season. And given what we saw in season 1, and knowing that there's challenges to doing too many large locations really well, there's certainly some question of whether they can do all of these locations that we might have read about in books 2 and 3. So we know Falme, and he's confirmed that we're at least going to see either Cairhien or Tyr, maybe both, he doesn't say, but I would lean more towards one than both. And I think based on things I talked about in my last video and what we know about some sets and so on, I think it's Cairhien. So that leaves a lot of doubt as to whether Tyr is going to be in the season at all. And that again might be something that they are saving for a later season, as he suggested. Grade Kangas Beef asks, favorite season 2 two-person scene with only the character names and no more. Rafe says Egwene, Rhaena. Very tantalizing little tease for fans of book 2. We know what scene he's talking about here. Egwene has been captured by the Shan-Chan and made Dimani, and Rhaena is the Soldam who is holding her. This is an absolutely foundational scene and moment for Egwene. This informs so much of her character, who she becomes, the direction that she goes in. So, of course, that scene was going to be in the show, but it's just awesome to hear that that ended up being one of Rafe's favorites. It's going to be a gut-punching scene. This is not going to be an easy scene to watch, but should make for some good TV. Maggie Melchior asks, since most of the main characters split up geographically at the beginning to the Great Hunt, will the next seasons keep them on parallel timelines for convergence at Falme, in which case the portal stones left a time gap of about 4 months for Rand's group? Easier to do on page or on film? Rafe says time gaps are very difficult, moving to the medium of television with the stories intercutting. But we do try to do as much as we can to avoid 1-hour cross-continent dragon flights. Oh, the shade being thrown at Game of Thrones there. But he brings up a good point, which is that fans of shows tend to notice when they're just ignoring any realities of travel for the convenience of getting characters where they need them, when they need them. And it doesn't look great. So with the characters not having a lot of fast means of travel, it's something they have to take into account. I've said before, I'll say it again, my guess is we're going to make more use of waygates, and I don't necessarily expect to see portal stones. If they do use waygates instead of portal stones, we're not going to have that 4-month time gap for Rand and anybody who's with him, so they'll have to handle that in a different way. Rafe just did some basic confirmations of things fans are wondering if we're going to see, and he's saying yes to. For instance, he's asked by Dedicated Grady, is the Dark Friends Social going to be in the show? Rafe says, yep. That is, of course, the prologue to book 2. And there's nothing to say that that's going to be at the beginning of the season as it was in the beginning of book 2, but at some point in this season, we're going to get to see that awesome, really great scene that can set up a lot of mysteries. Perhaps even answer some questions, depending on when they choose to include it and how much they choose to show us of who is there. Silverbow Reborn asks just Hopper. Rafe says, thank you. Why is no one ever giving Hopper the respect he deserves? Official announcement, Hopper is in season 2. Thank goodness. We knew we had to have more wolves. We know we have to have more of Perrin's journey, becoming a wolf brother. And the character of Hopper is so key to that journey. I can't wait to see it. There were a few questions about what Moraine is going to be doing in season 2. Me, My Mo Monkey asks any hints on Moraine's journey in season 2. Rafe says it's much expanded from her book 2 story, but built out of the core of that, and of a couple relationships that were not explored in the books. Lioness Wisdom asked, what is the journey like for Moraine and Lan in season 2 with their bond still masked? Another big departure point for us from the books is making much more story for Moraine and Lan. We aren't sitting these two amazing actors on the bench for a season, so we take what's in book 2 for them and expand it in a huge way. That's all I can say. 2 different questions that basically get more or less the same answer. What do we see from them in book 2? It's basically, for the most part, we do get in the beginning a little bit of Moraine interacting with Swan and Lan interacting with Rand. So that happens at the beginning. And then we have a scene for them in the middle of the book where they've gone to see Vandene and Adelius, looking for information from these 2 Aes Sedai who kind of keep to themselves and have a lot of knowledge. And then the other thing is part of that scene where they're with Vandene and Adelius is an exploration of the bond between them, how Lan is feeling about it. And it comes out that Moraine is planning to transfer Lan's bond to another Aes Sedai if she should die unexpectedly. So that's sort of a shock for Lan. That's a really big deal. So there's a lot to pull out of there. I mean, and what I would say basically is Moraine looking for answers, going to Aes Sedai that she can perhaps trust because they're not directly connected to Tar Valon at the moment, and an exploration of the bond, where they both stand on it, how they feel about their bond after all these years, and with new elements like Nynaeve coming into play, and perhaps an exploration of Moraine making a similar or the same decision about what she's going to do with the bond, given that her life is in danger. I think we can certainly presume that Moraine is going to have to figure out what's actually happening with her ability right now. That was left unclear at the end of season 1. I still am in the camp that her ability has just been shielded. She has been left with a tied off shield, and that's why she can't channel. So she'll have to deal with that. Given Rafe's answer about exploring relationships that were not explored in the book, I'm still hopeful that maybe we will get a Moraine-Swan interaction somehow in this season. That's a big one. And perhaps a relationship to another Aes Sedai that's been hinting at, which is Liandrin. So there are definitely other possibilities, but those 2 jump to mind for me because they were set up in season 1. And I'm still really hoping for some Lan and Rand interactions. I think that's really crucial. And if these 3 characters are reunited at some point, that becomes more possible. If Moraine makes her way to Cairhien in the show, there could be an explanation of her family and history there. And perhaps that's how we could get into a little bit of an introduction to Dias Ditmar. Asked to give us a hint of something he's looking forward to us seeing in season 2, Rafe says, we are so lucky to have the amazing Kate Fleetwood in the show. And you will love, hate, and love to hate her Lily. Well, I kind of already do, Rafe. Kate Fleetwood's Liandrin is just so much more compelling to me than the character was in the book. So I'm excited for whatever we get to see from her. And yes, I expect to be very mad at her at some points, but I'm here for it. Moon 1949 asks, did everything happen as planned this season, or did you guys have to change anything, as in the last 2 episodes of season 1? Rafe says there were unforeseen changes as we shot season 2 immediately after wrap of 107 and 108, but that's making television. Anyone who tells you there weren't unforeseen changes on their show is lying. Those answers basically duh. I mean, hopefully they weren't on the scale of losing a core cast member, and he doesn't suggest anything to that effect here. But yeah, of course, there's going to be some changes, especially in the era of COVID. Kraus92 had a cheat question about season 1 that Rafe actually answered. What was the biggest change in episode 8 that was brought by COVID restrictions compared to what you had originally planned? Rafe says the thing I liked the least was we originally had Egwene using the wisdom skills she learned in the pilot from Nynaeve to help her after the channeling in Faldara. But last-minute COVID changes on the day didn't allow for the same amount of touching, so it got switched, and I face melt emoji. You and me both, Rafe. This was definitely my number 1 complaint about the final episode of season 1, and the one thing that I probably would have really wanted to change if possible. So knowing that this was originally going to be different. Perhaps Egwene would have been giving Nynaeve CPR, and that's what she wasn't allowed to do, to put her mouth on Nynaeve's mouth. Yeah, that would have, I think, made clearer that Nynaeve wasn't dead, or she wasn't being healed in any sort of way that involved magic. Mostly Bree asks, are you sticking with the fun cold opens? Rafe says, yep, it's our ode to the out of POV chapters in the books, and we will always have them. This is great news, in my opinion. Something I really loved about season 1. It just leaves so many possibilities open for the show. They want to show something that isn't directly connected to the main action. Well, this is how they're doing it. And it just gives them so many things to bring in something thematic, to bring in something that's a piece of context or history, or checking in on some other part of the world that we're not really following without having to build a whole plot line out of it. It's great. And Robert Jordan did this exactly himself with his prologue. So again, it's a really great nod to the way the structure worked in the books. WoTup5, legendary Gawain fan that he is, says, I have to ask, Gawain, and I guess the lesser brother Galad, actually beat Mat in the warder training yard in the show, right? There's no way they lose on screen, is there? Rafe says this is an iconic scene from the book, and we are building to a believable version of it in the show. Hopefully. Ha. If you know John, of course he's teasing a little bit with that question, though he is a really big fan of Gawain. And I do like this answer from Rafe. It means that we are going to see some version of this in the show. Great, because we all, I think, really love this scene and want to see it. But I think it's fair to say that perhaps keeping it as literal Mat getting up from his deathbed and kicking the ass of two very competent fighters was a little bit much. So I want to see it. I don't mind if they perhaps don't have him getting off his deathbed to do it. Another hint, and we got in that behind the scenes teaser, is that maybe Mat trains a little bit. I mean, hopefully he can reference then some training he had already had in the Two Rivers. But if we actually get to see him like practicing before he goes and does this, it won't come quite so out of the blue. Merc82 asks, will weaves appear the same in the coming seasons? Rafe says, they're getting a bit of a revamp for season 2. Threads and colors and bears, oh my, but no bears. So I like that answer. I did like the way the weaves looked in season 1 and channeling overall, but I do love the idea that we might be getting to see a little bit more detail with the threads, different colors meaning different things. I think that would be really fun. And if they can actually build in that level of detail, could be awesome. Massey the Sassy wants to know if you get more chances to expand the dialogue more to let us see the characters better. Rafe says we are always trying to. Lots of one-on-one scenes that didn't get shot or didn't make the cuts, but I'm always fighting for them. I think that's where the characters really live or die, and our actors can always deliver when it's just two people in a room talking. I agree. I mean, as much as big action fantasy moment scenes are really fun and great to see on screen, you gotta have that heart of the characters, and I think that's so important to build upon. And I love those, deep character interactions where we get to really see their dynamics. So that Rafe is saying that he always wants more of these, bring them on. I want him to. Kyle Sucks at This asks, what was the scene you dreamed of bringing alive the most, and have you filmed it yet? Rafe says that scene is in the final episode of the show. Well, damn, Rafe, you've got a plan that far ahead. We kind of knew you did, but that makes me happy, and I really hope we get to see it. Schwartz Luke asks, which new cast member gave you the best, yep, that's, insert character name, moment in season 2 filming? Rafe says, I think this moment will be in the first or second trailer of season 2. It lives rent-free in my mind at all times. Rafe, you're really good at the teasing. So I look forward to seeing those trailers and looking for new characters and trying to figure out which one he's talking about. He was asked which character had his plot changed the most compared to the books. Rafe answered Mat, but we tried to bring the characters back to where they should be by the end of season 2. Mat is not a surprising answer there, given that they had to change his plot so much with the loss of Barney Harris and recasting of Donal Finn in this season. Where they should be at the end of season 2, hopefully they're all at least roughly in the same place and heading into where they would be in book 4. So that's pretty key, I think, to keep in mind. Heron Marked asked, why did you guys decide not to make the dagger instant death like the books? How did Loyal survive being stabbed by the dagger? Rafe says that's a story best told in a steading. I certainly hope that means we're going to see a steading in season 2. And I think that would make a lot of sense. I mean, we certainly see it in the books at that point. So I look forward to that, especially if we're going to be exploring a little bit more of the ways. It ties into that. I'd love to see Loyal have a little bit more of a story. Perrin Tops asks, will we get Do You Like to Dance, Perrin Ibarra? Rafe says yes. Now, we don't know who's going to be asking that question. Is that line going to be taken by Avienda instead of Gaul? We definitely want to know, and we don't know yet. WoTSeries asking, can you tell us what role Zelia Mendez-Jones will play, please? Rafe says Zelia is playing the role of knocking their scenes out of the forking park every time they stepped on set. You gotta give it to them for trying, and I would have loved to have this answer. I certainly want to know the answer to a lot of who these leaked actors are playing, but hey, he confirms that they're in the show, they're doing an amazing job. Definitely increases my excitement to see whatever character they're playing. Rafe is really brilliant with the snarky answers to questions that deserve it, so here's a couple for you. Niner Advocate, maybe you can open with an explanation of why you had the entire Shanshan ever-victorious Navy unleash everything they had on a poor little girl on the beach, or how you had the forces of Faldara hard charging the back of their own defensive fortification. Rafe says, that girl had it coming. So did the entire coastline and all its cities. Duh, guys. Honestly, I'm so tired of people thinking that the Shanshan did all of that for that one little girl. Fizzwiz asks, do the Shanshan still use the ball gags on the Damani? Rafe, I've never seen a ball gag on a Damani. Yep, a ball gag is a thing. It's not the thing that we saw on the Damani. Oh God, it's S asks, please tell us Gowan won't be likable. Please, please, please. You can't do this to me. Rafe, I love every character I write. I think you have to find a way to. So I love this question because I think a lot of us found in season 1 that there were characters in the books who we were kind of like, yeah, we don't like these characters, and kind of enjoyed that about them and would not have expected to have actually liked them in the show. But we're finding that to be the case with some characters like Leandrin, like Alana. What other characters can they make us like? I mean, for myself, I want to like Gowan. I want to like him before I get frustrated with him. And I want to care more when he makes decisions that I don't like. I think that Rafe's answer is smart. You do have to find a way to like the characters that you write, and actors who are playing the parts have to find a way to like them too. And that's how we get really wonderful actors like Priyanka Bose and Kate Fleetwood making us like their characters because they're great actors and they're finding the humanity in them. Delusions of Grendel wants to know, what's your favorite scene with Donald Finn and why is it him blowing the horn? Rafe says, hashtag let Donald toot is now the rallying cry of a generation. It's a nice non-answer there, Rafe. Well done with the other Aes Sedai answers. But I'm hopeful this means that we do get to see Matt blowing the horn. We gotta, right? Nadia T. Lee asks, when will Rand's luscious curly locks return? Rafe says, ask Yosha Stradowski. He should be growing them now. And then Luau asks, does Rand get his red and gold outfit this season? I can't wait to see Yosha officially in it. Rafe just gives a sort of smiling, hugging emoji. I take that for a yes. And as for his hair, I think that's also kind of a confirmation that this was a specific choice they made for Rand to cut his hair in season 2, perhaps as a way of sort of divorcing himself from his identity for a while. And hopefully the return of the red hair means an embracing of at least some aspects of his identity, like being the Dragon Reborn. Me Raving Mad, also known as James from the Queers of Time podcast, asks, in comparison to season 1, how much queer rep is there going to be? Rafe gives another nice Aes Sedai answer. It depends on how many great memes you churn out. We don't really get an answer here, leaving it to your imagination, but it's certainly going to have James scrambling to go make as many memes as they can. Rational Nerd, who is another member of the Queers of Time podcast, says, are you aware that as the second RJ writer for Wheel of Time, some parts of the fandom call you R2J2? Rafe says no, but this is my best news of the week. That was so cute, and I hadn't known that before. By the way, if you are interested in queer discussions around the Wheel of Time, definitely check out the Queers of Time podcast. They're new and a lot of fun. I also want to acknowledge that Sarah Nakamura, the show's book consultant, has been killing it on Twitter lately. You should totally follow her if you don't for some reason. She's been interacting with fans, some of whom are really negative about some changes on the show, as well as people who support them, so all kinds of fans. And in that process, she's been actually revealing some information about decisions they made in the show. I can't even cover all of it, but I did want to highlight some. As to the circle, yes, there were very few fundamental changes made to how the mechanics of the one power. This one was to enforce the knife's edge a channeler walks on, as well as raising the stakes down the line when, book spoiler, the lack of unity on top of fighting foes never encountered before and the true need to trust your sisters. Imagine the risk to open oneself up, knowing there is a possibility that someone else could burn you out. I think this idea makes what happens with the book spoiler amazing. She goes on, except that in the later series, we're dealing with channelers with godlike powers. Like I said, we made 2 fundamental changes to the magic system. We didn't do so lightly or without thinking through every aspect of what that means. It's like folks believe we go in making changes just because. It doesn't break the story in any way. That loophole lowers the stakes during high-pressure moments, in my opinion. When you don't have a ton of exposition and internal dialogue to convey things, you have to create tension in other ways. This is one. So she's confirming that the show has made 2 specific changes to the way the magic system works in the show compared to the books. One, she says, involves women's use of circles of the one power. And they're removing this loophole that says that if you're in a linked circle with other women, you can't draw so much of the power that someone gets burned out. We saw that happen. And there was the question of, did Amelisa, being a less experienced channeler, just do something wrong? And what she's saying is that no, this is just the way that circles work in the show. And I can absolutely understand them not wanting to have that little safety loophole that might lessen the stakes in certain moments. So they made this decision and she's making that clear. The second one she doesn't name, and so people had some responses. The one that stands out to me a little bit more is Moraine not knowing enough that she could say without lying that she was not aware that Nynaeve could channel. So she wasn't able to sense Nynaeve's ability to channel. Either you have to actively be channeling for someone to sense it perhaps, or there's some other mechanism that hasn't been explained yet. You know, that again might allow for some characters to hide in some situations without having to mask their ability. But maybe I'm missing something. Any other thoughts from you as to what other change might have been made in regards to how the magic works and why? I appreciate Sarah answering questions like this, Rafe answering questions like this. To me, it comes across to me how much they care about the books, care about the source material, care about getting these stories right. And yes, they always are acknowledging how much things do need to change because it's TV and because they don't have 14, 15 seasons to tell this story. They're trying to tell it in 8. I've talked about this so much on this channel. If you've watched all of that and you still can't quite understand why these kinds of changes need to be made, I don't know, man. Maybe adaptations are just not your thing. But at the same time, Sarah especially acknowledges how hard some of these changes are for her. And I think Rafe has said similar things. They are book fans, and it probably is somewhat painful for them to leave out some things that are special to them in the books. So, you know, they would probably relate to people who feel like some fans do, that are sad about not seeing certain things that they loved in the books. And again, I think Sarah has been great about interacting with fans who are disappointed with certain things. And she'll even have conversations with people who are approaching her kind of aggressively, and she'll still try to like have some genuine conversation there. And I've seen her be able to do that. So she's really good at it. The effort is there and I appreciate it. Time to wrap this up. Let me know your favorite answers from either Rafe or Sarah, and any theories that you've come up with for season 2 based on anything in the behind the scenes teaser or anything that Rafe had to say. Always want to hear from you. And until next time, gird your loins, my friends.